Hi all, in this video I'm going to go through the week 1 extra exercises and just sort of step you through how we can approach all the different graphs that are included there. So I'll get my screen sharing and we'll have a look at the first task and then we'll go from there. Alrighty, so we start off by getting this emissions.xlsx workbook, which you can download from the week 1 folder of LearnGCU. So the workbook contains data on greenhouse gas emissions from 1973 to 2012. It says across the world. It's actually just Australia and 2 other countries for this one. Next week's has a few more countries in it. So to start off, we're going to have a look at the 3 different types of greenhouse gases that are being emitted in Australia. So there's 3 that are included on the spreadsheet: CO2, N2O, and CH4. So we just want to create a scatter plot with respect to time to have a look at a line graph with respect to time to have a look at how those 3 have changed over time. And it should look like this when we're done, more or less. So let's open up that spreadsheet. These are the 3 columns here. So we've got our CO2, N2O, and CH4. We've also got our year column. So this one's actually not too bad. We can just sort of drag across those 4 columns that are all next to each other, highlight everything. And then if we go insert, we can actually click on the line graph directly, or we can go to recommended charts, and it's actually going to recommend a line graph as the first option. So recommended charts is usually pretty good. It gives you a good idea of reasonable ways to present the data. So if we compare that to what I just had on our PDF document, it's actually already pretty close in terms of the structure. We can do a few things to make it a little bit more readable. We can add some titles and axes titles. And I've also added sort of these points on each one so that we can see a bit more clearly which ones line up with which dates. So let's do those sorts of things now. So we can go emissions by gas type in Australia, 1970 to 2012. That's all run off the screen, but let me just finish that off and then close that so we can see it a bit better. Cool. And then just click away to finish that. To add axes titles, as you can see, we don't have axes titles there yet. So we can click on the plus and there's a few more options here. One of them is axes titles. So you can actually select to just turn on one or the other, but in this case, we want both. So just click the little tick box and that'll pop up. And then we can just double click on those to start to edit them. I think it was emissions by ton of equivalent CO2. Equivalent kilotons of CO2, kilotons. So I'll just write equivalent kilotons of CO2. So just to clarify on what that means, equivalent kilotons of CO2 is based on effectively how bad the different gases are. So I've included a little table down the bottom of the data. So N2O, which is our nitrous oxide, is equivalent to 298, almost 300 kilotons of CO2. So it's almost 300 times worse for the environment per ton than CO2 is. That's how to interpret that. And methane is 36 equivalent kilotons of CO2 for every ton of methane. So this is effectively graphing the truer impact. It's quantifying the severity of the actual gas along with the quantity that's being emitted. So the last thing we can do to pretty this up a little bit further is find that dot point style. So I just clicked on the paintbrush there to sort of check out what other styles are available. So you can sort of select styles that are automatically there. You can also do different things for data labeling and stuff there, but for now, let's just pick one of the generic styles. And then you can make it a little bit bigger so that you can read everything a bit clearer. And that's pretty much it for that first one. So that's our first graph. So another thing you can do that's not actually on the extra exercises, but you can use formulas to convert this to actual tons. So we might go through that as a bit of an example because I know quite a few people have been asking about how to use formulas and then generate graphs from it. So let's just create an extra column here. So CO2 actual, N2O actual, and CH4 actual. So that's actual tons rather than, or actual kilotons rather than equivalent kilotons of CO2. So CO2 is going to be nice and easy because 1 kiloton of CO2 equals 1 kiloton of CO2. So we can just sort of directly reference that. And in fact, we don't even really need to create the extra column, but I'll do it just for the sake of keeping it all together. For the N2O, we can take this one and we can divide it by the equivalency factor. So we can divide it by this cell here. So you can just click on that, or you can type it in manually, whichever works for you. And the other thing you can do is you can actually put the $signs in to change that to a static reference. And the reason we want to do that is because when we autofill it, it'll actually try to shift that reference as well, but we don't want it to shift that reference. We want it to apply that same conversion factor to every single data point. So click on enter there, double click that, and we can see that that's generated that whole list there. So our last one's CH4, so again we can click equals our CH4 cell, and then we can divide it by our conversion factor. And again, we'll add the $signs in, and that'll fix that reference. So just to show you how that's working actually, if we see here, as we go down, turn the scroll lock on, as we go down the list, the row changes for the E term, so E3, E4, E5, E6, but the row doesn't change for the B term. So if we hadn't used those $signs, it probably would have tried to change the row. It might not have tried to change the column, but safest option is to just put the $signs on both if we definitely don't want it to change. So that's how you can kind of use formulas to make a conversion. And what we can then do is we can graph that, so we can select the year column again. And if you hold Control on your keyboard, or if you're using Mac, I believe it's Command instead, you can just hold that key down and highlight whatever else you want to highlight. And actually I've probably highlighted too far, yeah, because there's stuff in those columns. So you might just have to do that a little bit more manually. I'll highlight this down at the bottom, hit Control or Command if you're on a Mac, and highlight those. And then we can have a look at our recommended charts again and graph those. So this actually tells quite a different story, because when you look at it in terms of raw numbers, it looks like CO2 is the problem, because we're emitting a lot of CO2. N2O looks like it's actually not much of a problem at all. It almost appears to be flat at 0. And then CH4 is kind of up here, slowly rising, but still doesn't look like anywhere near as much of a problem as CO2. So that's why we kind of quantify it in those equivalent kilotons of CO2, because this here, the top one, tells a better story in terms of actual environmental impact. Let's just give these a title. So emissions by gas type in Australia, pretty much can give this the same title, because we'll label the axes in such a way that it's clear what the difference is. So kilotons is all we need to put for that one. And in here we can put our year. And we can again choose a style that's kind of got some dots so that we can better line it up with the actual years. So there you have it. We've got our example of using formulas there to generate a line graph as well. Okay, so let's move on now to our second exercise. So exercise 2 wants us to have a look at emissions by industry. So we're going to stay in the same spreadsheet, and we're going to create this stacked bar graph that illustrates the emissions of each industry for the entire range of years. And then we're also going to create a line graph that shows the same data, and we'll have a bit of a chat about how those tell different stories. So it's all about data representation. So we'll start with our stacked bar graph. So again, this one's not too hard. A lot of the data is already kind of there for us to use. So we can just highlight our year column again, all the way down. And then we've got our sort of 5 sectors here. So I can't remember what the difference between other industry. Yeah, so other industry is other industrial type companies, whereas other sectors is from various other sectors. That's all the information that was provided when I downloaded this database. So a bit ambiguous what the 2 different others are, but let's just go with it. We'll highlight our year, and then we'll highlight our 5 business sector columns. So again, just holding down Control on your keyboard or Command if you're on Mac. Then we can go Insert Recommended Charts. Again, we've got a couple of options here. So if we click through them, we can actually see that our stacked bar chart is one of those options. So we can click OK on that. The other option is to just go directly through the bar chart option here and find it there. But the recommended charts is a, whoops, I accidentally dragged that data across. Let's try not to do that. All right, why isn't it letting me click on the actual graph? There we go. Maybe not. There we go. Not sure why it decided not to cooperate with me then. Cool. Really doesn't like me today. Let's just arrow over and some drag. There we go. Cool. So now we can just add those finishing touches again. So what title did I have before? Emissions by industry in Australia. That seems pretty reasonable. So again, just double click to start editing. And I like to include the year range here too, because it just sort of adds a little bit of extra information about the data. Again, switch our axes labels on by clicking the plus and clicking axes titles. Double click to edit. Once you're in kind of an editing section, you can also hit Control A on your keyboard to select the whole thing and start to write over it. Command A should do the same thing in Mac if I'm right about that, but I'm not much of a Mac user. So this was again in equivalent kilotons of CO2, I'm pretty sure. We'll just check that in the dictionary. Yes, measured in equivalent kilotons of CO2. All right, so that's pretty much that one done. The other thing you could do is you could have a look at styles and see if there's any other sort of graphs that you like better. Maybe like that one has wider bars, for instance, so that's pretty nice. I might actually go for that one and just reduce the size of this. So you can edit the text size in titles and stuff, much the same way you can with any other Microsoft program, just by using the sort of size and font controls up here. Cool, that looks pretty nice now. I think I'll leave that alone. So then part 2 was to do the same thing for a line graph. So we're trying to generate this line graph now. So let's go back into Excel. We'll highlight all the same data and we'll do it all again with a line graph. So year, and then holding down either the Control or Command key, depending on what machine you're using. Highlight all of our business sector. Oop. There we go. And then insert. Again, we can do a recommended chart, and actually the first one's going to be a line chart, so it kind of knows that that's going to be a good option. I'm just going to scroll out so that I can move this a little bit easier than I could last time. There we go. And again, we can just pretty it up in the same way that we've prettied up all the others. So we can use pretty much the same chart titles as the one above. So I'll just get those both on the screen there. Emissions by industry in Australia, 1970 to 2012. Click on the graph, click on the plus, click on axes titles to get those up, and then double click to edit. Put year along the bottom and our equivalent kilotons of CO2 along the side. And the other thing we haven't actually had to do manually for any of these is it generates this little legend here showing you what color means what. That's because we highlighted the headings as part of it. So you might have noticed when I was highlighting before, I actually highlighted from the heading down, and that's how it knows what these are. So if there is no heading, you're going to have to create your legend manually, but given that we've got those headings, we just need to make sure we highlight them as part of our data highlighting. I don't think I did anything too fancy with that graph after that point. So the reflection question for this was, which of the above graphs conveys the information about emissions by industry most effectively? You could kind of justify whatever you wanted to justify, but the way I see it is that the line graph tells the story much better. The reason being that in this stacked bar graph, if we have a look at the yellow for other industry and the grey for our transport, it's really quite hard to see how those are trending because they're stacked on top of this power industry stuff. So it's really hard to see whether these are individually increasing or decreasing because they all look kind of the same size and they're stacked on top of other information. So it just sort of reduces your ability to see what's actually happening with the transport and other industry categories. Whereas in this one, it's very, very clear that they're also trending upwards, particularly transport's trending upwards. Other industry kind of ducked down and then has started to slowly rise again. Pretty flat though, really, so perhaps not so bad in terms of increases there. And you can also see the comparatively small effect of the building and other sector there. So this gives you probably a clearer idea. And one way you could get a clearer idea again would be to plot each one separately if you wanted to get more information about how a particular sector has performed over that period of time. Alrighty, that's task 2. So task 3 is emissions by industry as a pie chart. So we're going to use the sum formula to firstly calculate the total emission for each industry over the entire period. And then we're going to create a pie chart that illustrates those totals. And then we'll discuss how that compares to our line and bar graphs. So let's jump back over here. I've actually created a row for your sums. So this one here should be our industry column. Yep. So we just go equals sum, and you can either type it in manually. So you can manually type in, it goes from I think it's F2 to F45. And we get that sum. Was it F2? No, it was F3. So we can just tweak that, but it seems like it's worked it out anyway. So change that to F3. Yeah, it already had. And then we can actually autofill across those 5 columns by just clicking and dragging that bottom corner. So that should have updated the row as it went across, the column. So you can see that it went F, G, H, I, J, which is the behavior we were hoping for. So it just saves you typing out that formula again and again. So now we can just plot those. So if you want it to do the legend automatically, you can actually select those labels, press Control or Command, and select the data. Then when you go Insert Recommended Charts, it'll have them there automatically. You could also just select the data and then fill out the legend manually, but that makes it a little bit quicker. So click OK, and now we have our pie chart. And I'm just going to again zoom out and move that to a position a bit more in line with the rest of our graphs. And then zoom back in on it. Alrighty. So a few things we can do here. We can firstly look at adding a title like I've got here. So this one represents total emissions, not emissions over a time period. So I've added that total word at the start, and I've still included the time it encompasses. So we can add that in there. Total emissions by industry, Australia, from 1970 to 2012. And we can probably just drop that font size by a little bit so that it fits on one line. Yep. And then we can look at adding some data labels to this. So if you click on the plus here, there's actually a lot less options than there are for the other graph types, but data labels is one of them. And if you click on the arrow, you actually get some more options for where they are. So I'm going to put them on the inside end, and then I'm also going to edit them. So if we click here, label options. So if we click on the label options, so let's step through that again, sorry. So I've clicked on the actual label there, that brings up label options. And then if you select the little like bar graph logo, there's a few options here. So I'm going to tick on percentage and we'll have a look at how that changes it. So you can see there, it's added the percentage after just the raw number. So if we want just the percentage, we can actually unselect value and values that raw number. So it's taken that away now and we've just got those percentages left. So depending on what you're trying to convey, in this case, I just wanted to use percentages because that's what I had in the task sheet. So I just wanted to show you how you can do that. But you could leave it in raw numbers if there was a reason to do that. You can also change the text of those. You can change the fill, the size. You can also do that just by increasing it here. So you don't have to go into that side panel for the font. So that's our pie chart. And in terms of the story it tells compared to the other ones, it kind of gives a snapshot view. It gives a snapshot view of the industries and their total impact on the environment. So it's just a quick overview saying, well, over the last, 42 years, the power industry has been the worst offender. The other and transport industries have been pretty much even second. And then other sectors followed by buildings. So it's just like a really bird's eye view of the overall problem. However, it doesn't tell you anything about trends. So from that, you can't see whether or not any of those industries have improved or gotten worse. So you really need to dive deeper because while that's not the case in this data, it could have actually been that the trend for power was the opposite way around, started high and dropped off to low, in which case it's still a positive trend, even if it is the highest contributor. So yeah, it provides a snapshot view, but you really need to dive deeper to find anything meaningful out of the data. But that's a pie chart and they are useful as a quick overview. What's next? Okay, next up we're going to compare the emissions of 3 countries per capita. So we're going to try and graph our emissions per capita for each country. So this is actually going to the next spreadsheet, the emissions 3 countries spreadsheet. And we're aiming to get a graph that looks something like this. So we can go to emissions 3 countries and we can start off. So I'm going to start with just Australia. So I'm going to highlight the years here. And then I'm going to highlight the ratio per capita here. All the way down to that 2012 point. I'm going to stop there and I'm going to insert that graph. So again, recommended charts, it's going to give me a line graph. Either that or you can just insert the line graph yourself, which you can do by clicking on the little line icon there. But let's click OK on that. And we have a single line. Now what we can do to add second series, so each line is a series of data. That's the terminology in Excel. So we can select data using that select data button. And then you can actually add another series. So let's click add here. We can give it a name. So our next country is the United Kingdom. So we can say United Kingdom. And then we can highlight that range. Oh, what happened with the name there? Oh, I forgot to click down. So United Kingdom for that. Oh, what's it doing? United Kingdom. And then for the series values, we want to select that data. So let's try that again. So important to click down to the next box because it tried to add that to the name instead of the actual data section. Highlight those and click OK. We might actually edit this one while we're here. So this ratio per capita one, we're going to edit that and call it Australia. So let's click OK and have a look at how our graph looks. So you can see now we've got 2 trend lines. We've got, well, we don't actually know what that one is because there's no legend. So let's click on the plus and add one of those. So legend, I don't really like it being on the side. So you can click the arrow there and select where you want it. I'm going to put it on the bottom. So now you can see Australia per capita versus the United Kingdom per capita. So now we can do that same process again to add in the United States, which is our 3rd country. So I'll scroll down first. This is a little bit far zoomed out actually. I'll zoom in a little bit, make that a bit easier to read. So then we go to chart design, select data again, and we're going to go over here and add another series called United States. we're going to click in here and clear all that out. And then we're going to select the United States data. And press OK. And press OK again. And if we scroll back up, we can see that there's now 3 lines with our Australia, United Kingdom and United States data. So let's have a look at what else we need to do to pretty that up to get it to look like the example. Just a title and a different style. Cool. So we can click the plus to add in the title for both the axes and the overall chart title because that wasn't there by default. So emissions per capita. And that year range was again 1970 to 2012. Oh, x-axis is going to be year. And our y-axis, what did I call that last time? Oh, I obviously didn't change it. Oh no, it probably actually is equivalent kilotons of CO2. Let's check what that one is in. Yeah, it is in equivalent kilotons of CO2. Sorry, I probably should step through what I just did there. So I just checked that information about the data sheet, which was provided by the database source. And it just says there that the ratio per capita is measured in equivalent kilotons of CO2. So let's highlight that, equivalent kilotons of CO2. And then we can click on the graph again and click our little paintbrush for styles and find that style with the little dots all the way along, which I just find is quite nice to read, but it's not necessary. You can see the trend without having those individual dots. So that one, the difference was that we went through and we had to add those series of data a little bit more manually. If you try and highlight all of the years and all of the data, it just sort of does some funny things with its graph. So that's at least the most straightforward way that I've found to build up that data. It's partially because of how the database is structured. Potentially it'd be a lot nicer if the countries were kind of listed horizontally and you could select multiple columns horizontally, but that's not how it's been done. So you can just manually select a series of data and it'll populate it like it has here. And the result is pretty nice. So let's have a look. I think we're actually up to our last question now. We sure are. So we're going to use the sum formula to calculate the total quantity of each greenhouse gas emitted by each country. So for example, the total CO2, total NH4, and so on for each country. And then we're going to try and create a bar graph that looks like this. So I've again left a bit of a space for you to do those sums. So the first three columns after year are the types of gases. So we want to do a sum here from, I believe it's F3. Oh, sorry, C3. F was in my head from before. So to C45. Hopefully that's highlighted everything. Yep. Oh, I must have bumped my keyboard when I hit enter then. There we go. And then just autofill that across. And then we can do the same thing with the United Kingdom. So equals sum, and I might just highlight this one. So I'll scroll up to the start of the United Kingdom and highlight. And then just click and autofill across. And lucky last, we have the United States equals sum. Highlight that. And then click and drag across. That's quite a big number. Alrighty, so then we can actually turn that into a bar graph. So we're going to have to highlight multiple ranges here. So let's just highlight the numbers. So highlight those 3, scroll down to the bottom of the UK, highlight those 3, and scroll down to the bottom of the US and highlight those 3. Then go to insert recommended charts, and you can see that this clustered column is one of the first ones to pop up. So there's a couple of different styles for that. Not sure what's the difference between those two. I think it's just swapped them around in order. Yeah. So click OK on that and that'll get inserted. And we can drag that one up to somewhere a bit closer to the previous one. Sorry, just scrolling out to drag a bit more easily. And then we can actually add the legend in manually because we didn't have that entered automatically. So you can't actually double click on these. So what you can do is you can select the whole thing and click on select data, and all those names are there. So you just need to edit those. So that one is actually that one appears to be our UK from C46 onwards. Oh no, that was Australia, sorry. So that's Australia. Because that was at C46. Edit that one. This one was the United Kingdom. What's it done? Oh no, it's done it by gas. Okay, so this will be whichever the middle gas was. Sorry. So this will be N2O. And this one will be CO2, not Australia. It's done by gas, not by country. And then series 3 will be CH4. So that's the 3 gases there. And then our horizontal ones are the ones we're going to change to our country. So we'll have Australia, we'll have United Kingdom. Whoop. Oh, it wants a range. Okay, let's see if we can just select multiple. So if we just select multiple cells, let's see if it likes that better. Yeah, okay. So just hold control and select one instance of each one because it doesn't like you trying to do that manually. So now we have this graph of Australia's emissions per gas, United Kingdom's emissions per gas, and United States emissions by gas. So then we can just change the title up. What did I have last time? Emissions by country. Actually, I think I used pretty much the same titles as the one above. So let's just have a look at what we had there. Yeah, so that's equivalent kilotons of CO2 as well. And then this one here is, well, we probably don't actually need that title because it's pretty clear that that's countries. So we can actually remove the primary horizontal title and just leave it as those countries. So the reflection question at this point was, which of these makes each country look worse? So if we have a look at the first graph, per capita Australia is worse. So per person we have more emissions. But then when you look at graph 2, our emissions by country graph, you can see that the raw amount is very, very low compared to the United States. So certainly in our bottom one, United States looks worse by far. All of those bars are clearly much larger. Australia and the UK seem pretty similar in terms of CO2 and N2O, with the UK being higher for CH4. When we look at per capita, Australia is by far the worst. The US is in the middle and the UK looks pretty good compared to both of us. So different stories are being told by these different graphs, because you can see here that Australia has the lowest just raw number of emissions, but we have the highest per person. So 2 different stories depending on what you're trying to investigate and trying to tell. So that is our week 1 exercises. So we can pretty much wrap the screencast up here, and I'll do another one of these for week 2. So look forward to that.